Get out of my apartment if you're infertile. A young woman already gave me one child and will give me more. That's what her husband brazenly declared after 12 years of marriage. In the very park where they first met, the wife handed him an envelope, and when he opened it, the fool was left speechless. Dear friends, before we continue, tell us where in the world you're reading from. It means so much to us to know how far our stories travel. Elena woke up at 5:30. As always, her body was long used to the rhythm. Get up, brew strong coffee, check on the preparations for tomorrow at the atelier. But this morning smelled like change. On the table lay translated documents for the American partners, and in her head, a modernization plan was forming. One that could change everything. Rosas, that was the name of her creation, inherited from her grandmother Carmen. The old atelier on Avenida Libertad still remembered the days of the military junta, when long lines formed at her grandmother's door for quality tailoring. Now, Elena dreamed of restoring that former glory with the help of modern American equipment. Diego, did you remember the signature? She asked, pouring coffee into his favorite mug. The one that said, "Best Dad." Diego looked up from his phone. Lately, his gaze had taken on a distant quality, as if he were looking through her into some other, unreachable place. What signature? He muttered, not even touching the mug. The loan agreement. Mr. Johnson and his colleague are coming at 10. We've been discussing this for a month. Diego shrugged and returned to his phone screen. Elena felt something shift inside her. Delicate, almost imperceptible, like the first crack in a favorite cup. By 9:30, she was already standing at the bank entrance, nervously flipping through the documents. Next to her stood Rafael, the translator, a silver-haired, distinguished man who had once worked with major state enterprises. "Where is Don Diego?" he asked with concern. "Americans are punctual people. They don't like being kept waiting." Elena dialed her husband's number. Long rings, then short ones. Finally, a voice. "Hello? Diego, we're waiting for you. Where are you?" "I'm not coming, and I'm not signing anything." The words hit her like a hammer. The world suddenly tilted, even though the city still buzzed around her and the hot sun was shining brightly. "What do you mean you're not coming? We have a meeting with the Americans." "I've decided it's not reasonable. Too much risk for the family budget." "What risk? We've calculated everything. The new equipment would pay for itself in 2 years. Elena, don't make a scene in the street. I've made my decision." Click. He hung up. Rafael tactfully turned away, pretending to study the bank's window display. 10 minutes later, a white SUV pulled up, and 2 impeccably dressed men stepped out. Mr. Johnson, a tall, fit American in his 50s, greeted her in Spanish with a noticeable accent. "Señora Ramirez, good afternoon. Where is your husband?" "He fell ill. Suddenly." The lie sounded pathetic, even to her own ears. The meeting lasted half an hour. The Americans were polite but firm. Without the personal guarantee of her husband, who was also a co-owner of the family business, the deal was impossible. When their car disappeared around the corner, Rafael gently placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. "Señora, is everything all right at home?" Elena didn't answer. She didn't know the answer to that question. She returned home after dark. Diego was sitting in the kitchen, staring into a plate of cold asado. He didn't even look up when she entered. "The Americans left," Elena said quietly, sitting across from him. "The deal is off." "Good." "Good? Diego, this was our chance. Grandma's atelier could have become the best in the city." He finally looked at her. There was something final in his eyes, the look of someone who had already crossed a line. "Elena, we need to get a divorce." The words hung in the air. Somewhere, a faucet dripped, The clock ticked on the wall, and the fridge hummed. The usual sounds of an ordinary evening in an ordinary family. Only the family no longer existed. What did you say? I've met another woman. We have a son. He's 10 months old. The world turned upside down. Elena felt the ground slip from under her feet, the walls of the room slowly closing in. 12 years of marriage. 12 years of hope, of plans, of trying to have a child. 12 years of life that suddenly turned into nothing. 10 months, she whispered. So last year when we celebrated our anniversary, yes, even then. And I gave you that watch, with the engraving, to my beloved husband from your loving wife. Do you remember? Diego turned away. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you stay silent for a whole year? I hoped it would pass, that it was just a temporary madness. But when Mateo was born... Mateo, Elena repeated, as if tasting the name of someone else's child. You have a son named Mateo? Yes. And he needs a stable home, a normal, complete family. So I'm not normal? You don't understand. I'm 36. This is my only chance to be a father. Elena stood up and walked to the window. Children were playing in the courtyard. Their voices reached her like muffled echoes from another life. We tried. For so many years, we tried to have a child. We tried and failed. And now I have a son, and I'm not giving him up. I'm not asking you to give him up. We could still... What? All live together? Diego's voice held a mocking edge. Elena, stop fantasizing. It's over. She turned around. Her husband sat with his arms crossed, the expression of someone who had already made up his mind. Be out of the apartment by the weekend. I'm bringing Valeria and Mateo. Valeria, Elena repeated. Beautiful name. She's 25. She's young. She can have more children. The words cut like a knife. Elena felt something break inside. Not her heart, not her soul, but the very foundation of her being. 12 years, Diego. We spent 12 years building this life. We built it and we destroyed it ourselves. You couldn't give me an heir. We couldn't, or I couldn't. He didn't answer, but his silence spoke the whole truth. The night dragged on endlessly. Diego locked himself in his study. Elena sat in the kitchen, going through old family photos from a worn-out box. There was their wedding, her in a white dress sewn by her grandmother's hands, him holding a bouquet of roses. There was their vacation in Mar del Plata, where they dreamed of children. There was the housewarming in this very apartment, where they planned to turn a room into a nursery. By morning, she had packed her documents, her grandmother's jewelry, and a few bags with the essentials. Her hands didn't shake. A strange calm had set in, the kind that comes when you've hit bottom and realize there's nowhere left to fall. At 6 a.m., she dialed her mother's number. Mom, it's me. Can I come stay with you? Of course, my darling. What happened? I'll tell you later. I'm already on my way. The Rosas atelier greeted her with locked doors and an unfamiliar security guard. You can't go in, the young man in a black jacket said. There's an order. What order? This is my atelier. I'm following instructions from Senor Ramirez. He came by yesterday and said the property is now under his ownership. Elena stood on the threshold of her life's work, unable to believe what she was hearing. Through the glass storefront, she could see familiar mannequins, sewing machines, shelves of fabric, everything that had made up her world for the past 10 years. Senora Elena. She turned around. Hurrying toward her was Concepcion, her loyal assistant, who had worked at the atelier since her grandmother's time. "Concepcion, what's happening?" "Aye, my dear." The elderly woman took her arm gently. "Come, let's go to the cafe. I'll explain. There's so much going on." In the small cafe across the street, Concepcion ordered 2 coffees and began to speak, clearly shaken. "Yesterday he showed up with some guy," Concepcion said. "Told us he's the new owner. Started calling our clients and canceling orders. Said the atelier is closing for renovations. And this morning, he already put a security guard at the door." "Canceling orders?" Elena felt the first stirrings of anger slowly pushing out the despair. "We have Julia's wedding dress. The ceremony is on Saturday." "Exactly. And Don Emilio's anniversary suit. People are panicking, calling, asking what to do." Elena finished her coffee and stood up with resolve. "Concepcion, do you know lawyer Moreno? Carlos?" "Of course, he was friends with your father. A good man." "Then let's go to him. It's time to restore justice." As they stepped out of the cafe, Elena glanced one last time at her atelier. In the window stood a mannequin in an unfinished dress, a piece she'd started last week. Back then, in another life, when her world was still whole, but something inside her was already beginning to rebuild. Not her heart, it still ached. Not her soul, it was still bleeding. It was her inner core, the same iron will passed down from her grandmother, the strength that had helped the women in their family survive every storm. Diego thought he had broken her. He was wrong. Elena arrived at her mother's house just as the morning mist was beginning to lift, promising a hot day, a day to begin a new life. Dolores opened the door before Elena even rang the bell. She stood on the threshold in an old cotton robe, her silver hair tied in a loose bun, and looked at her daughter with eyes that held no surprise, no questions, only understanding and a quiet sorrow, the particular kind of sorrow only mothers know, collected over years of watching others' mistakes become their children's pain. "Come in, my dear. I've been waiting for this." Elena stepped over the threshold of her childhood home, the one that smelled of vanilla and fresh empanadas, where every object held a family story like pages from an invisible book of memory. Her bags hit the hallway floor with a thud, and with them, the last of her strength. That taut string of dignity that had kept her from breaking down in front of strangers. "Mama, how did you know?" Dolores embraced her tightly, the way only a mother can, like she used to hold little Elena after school disappointments or the first heartbreaks of childhood. "A month ago, I saw him at the mall. He was walking with a young woman and a baby. He was pushing the stroller and smiling. Smiling like he hadn't smiled at home in a long time." Elena pulled away slightly, studying her mother's face. In it, she saw not just sorrow, but a deep, ancient weariness, the kind of tiredness a woman carries after seeing too much, understanding too much of human nature to be surprised by its weaknesses anymore. "Why didn't you tell me?" What would it have changed? Dolores spread her hands with the resigned wisdom that only comes with age. I could see it. He had already made his choice. I only hoped I was wrong, that maybe she was a niece or a goddaughter, but a mother's heart rarely makes mistakes about these things. They walked into the kitchen, the heart of the house, where all the important matters were always decided. Her mother set the kettle on the stove and took out an old ceramic cup with roses from the cupboard, the same one Elena used to drink from when she was sick as a child. "You know what Grandma Carmen told me when your grandfather left us?" Dolores sat down across from her daughter at the round table, worn from years of family dinners, scarred by children's knives and scorched by hot pots. "What doesn't kill us makes us stronger." I was 13 then. I cried and couldn't understand how life could go on without Papa. Grandpa left. Elena was surprised, as if hearing something about herself she had never known. You never told me. Why burden you? You grew up happy with your dad. Why pass on someone else's pain? Her mother poured hot coffee into the teapot, and the kitchen filled with the familiar aroma, the scent that connected generations, that created the feeling of home, of constancy in a changing world. But now it's time you knew. Your grandfather Ricardo left Grandma for his secretary, left her with 2 kids, your father and Aunt Soledad. That was in 1962. Elena listened as if she were hearing the story of her own family for the first time. In her memory, Grandma Carmen had always been strong and independent, the owner of a thriving atelier, the one who always had the right words and skilled hands. It was hard to imagine her young, abandoned, desperate, exactly how Elena herself now felt. What did she do? What could she do? Dolores gave a small laugh, not bitter, but laced with understanding of life's inevitable trials. She'd known how to sew since she was a child, had golden hands, took the old Singer sewing machine, the one from your great-grandmother, and started taking orders from home. At first, just the neighbors, repairs, adjustments. Then word spread, Carmen could make any dress look like it came straight from a magazine. And that's how the atelier started? Not right away. For 3 years she scraped by, renting tiny rooms wherever she could. But she sewed day and night. Your father used to say he'd fall asleep to the sound of the machine and wake up to it, still going. And in 1965, she finally saved enough for her first shop on Avenida Libertad. Do you remember the sign that hung over the door? Elena nodded. Of course she remembered. Custom Tailoring Atelier, Master K. Ramirez. Simple words that held an entire life behind them. Struggle, tears, sleepless nights, but also pride, dignity, and the right to earn one's own bread. Grandma used to say, a woman should always have her own bread. A man might leave, children will grow up and fly away, but your hands and your mind will stay with you until the end. That's why I was so proud when you brought the atelier back to life. The tradition lives on. Tradition, Elena echoed bitterly, and in that word was all the horror of realization, that life moves in circles, that history repeats itself, that the women in their family were destined for loneliness and struggle. And now Diego wants to take that away, too. He can try. Her mother's voice rang with steel. Not rage, not anger, but the cold resolve of someone who knows the price of justice and is ready to fight for it. Let him try. Tomorrow we go see Carlos Moreno. He knew your father back when he was a student. He'll help, I'm sure of it. The evening passed in conversations that felt like archaeological excavations of family memory. Dolores pulled out old boxes with photos, letters, documents, the history of the women in their family, each one of whom had endured her own trials and found the strength to persevere. There was Grandma in her youth, holding 2 children, thin, exhausted but with unbreakable will in her eyes. Then, 10 years later, confident, successful, in a beautifully tailored suit of her own making, standing proudly beside her atelier's sign. There was her mother at the teaching college, a dreamy girl with long braids, then holding a mathematics diploma, later as a school principal, a woman who raised generations of children. See how it goes? Dolores arranged the photos in chronological order, like tarot cards of fate, each one telling a story of survival. Each of us has fallen and risen again. Each found her path. And so will you. Elena picked up a photo of her grandmother at the sewing machine. Her face was focused, her hands skilled, creating beauty from plain fabric. It was something Elena recognized from her own reflection each morning before work. The same focus, the same understanding of material, the same love for the craft. "Mama, do you regret that I married so young?" "I regret not warning you," Dolores sighed, with the particular sorrow that comes from realizing a parent's helplessness before their child's fate. "I saw it. Diego had a weak character, always blaming others, afraid of responsibility. But you loved him so much." "Loved." Elena traced the edge of the photo with her finger, as if trying to reconnect with the memory of a time when love felt eternal and unbreakable. "Or maybe I just got used to loving him. 12 years, that's a habit." "Then it's good the habit broke. Now there's room for something real." In the morning, they drove to the lawyer's office through streets slowly waking from their slumber. Carlos Moreno worked out of an old mansion on Colonial Street, a 2-story house with high ceilings, ornate molding, and wooden floors that dated back to the era of independence. Within its walls lingered the continuity of eras, the reliability of tradition, and the quiet confidence that justice existed and could be restored. The lawyer himself was a man in his early 40s, fit, graying slightly, with attentive brown eyes and a firm handshake. There was something of the old-school intellectual in his presence, a kind of decency that didn't need to be advertised, a dependability time had tested. "Nena!" He embraced her like a father would, and in that hug was so much warmth that for a moment it seemed the world couldn't be entirely hostile as long as people like him still existed. "The last time I saw you was at your father's birthday," he said. "You were still in your school uniform." "Don Carlos," Elena smiled for the first time in 2 days, and it felt like the first ray of sunlight after a long winter. "Thank you for agreeing to see us." "Dolores already filled me in on the basics," he said, leading them into his office. It was a spacious room with a heavy oak desk, leather chairs, and rows of law books on the shelves, silent witnesses to the idea that justice has tools of its own. "But let's go through it properly. Tell me everything, just as it happened." Elena spoke slowly, trying not to leave anything out, but each word came with effort. She had to relive the humiliation, the betrayal, the collapse of everything she believed in. Carlos listened intently, occasionally jotting notes in his notebook, sometimes clarifying legal details. There was something almost medical in the way he listened, a quiet capacity to absorb another person's pain without letting it destroy him. "All right," he said finally, his tone now filled with professional confidence. "The atelier is registered as a sole proprietorship under your name. Diego has no legal claim to it, even if he helped with advice or money. It's your property." "Then why is there a security guard blocking me from entering?" "Because your husband is overstepping his authority. Tomorrow we'll file a court petition to reinstate your legal access and prohibit any third parties from interfering in your business." Elena felt something begin to thaw in her chest. Not yet joy, but hope. A realization that not everything was lost, that there were still forces in the world capable of defending what was right. For the first time in 3 days, she felt confidence return about tomorrow. "And the apartment?" "The apartment is more complicated. It's shared marital property, so it'll be divided equally during the divorce. But..." Carlos raised a finger, like someone fluent in the language of the law. "Until the divorce is finalized, he has no right to evict you or move anyone else in without your consent." "So I can go back home?" "You can," Carlos nodded. "But the atmosphere will be tense. It's better to stay at your mother's for now and use the apartment only to handle formalities." Dolores leaned forward with the kind of practical expression common to women who are used to planning several steps ahead. "Don Carlos, how long will the divorce take?" "If Diego doesn't resist, about 3 to 4 months. But if he starts dragging it out, demanding compensation, disputing the division of property, it could take up to a year. Compensation? Elena frowned. For what? Some men in these cases start claiming they invested in their wife's business, helped it grow. They demand a share or reimbursement, Carlos said, shaking his head with the look of someone who had seen many shades of human nature. Usually, it's just pressure tactics, trying to push the woman into accepting unfavorable terms. I have all the documents, Elena said firmly, and there was steel in her voice, the same kind her mother carried. Every receipt, every income report. The atelier was built on my own money. Perfect. That makes the defense much easier. Carlos opened a thick folder and pulled out several forms. Now we'll file a motion to freeze jointly owned assets and to restore your legal rights over the atelier. Everything will be ready by Monday. As they filled out the paperwork, Carlos suddenly set down his pen and looked at Elena seriously, like a father about to offer advice before his daughter made an important life decision. You know what I'll say to you as an old friend of the family? Don't engage in a fight with that… what's her name? Valeria. Don't try to prove you're better. Don't fight for Diego. He's already made his choice. I have no intention to, Elena replied, surprised. Why would I want someone who betrayed me? You're thinking clearly now. But when emotions take over, you may feel the urge to take revenge, to humiliate him, to show him what he lost. Don't do it. Keep your dignity. How much will your help cost? Dolores asked, with the same practical tone of someone who had lived through hard times. Carlos waved it off with a generosity that came from the heart, not the wallet. We'll work something out with Andres's daughter, your father, he said, turning to Elena. Once saved my life. We were fishing, and I fell into the river during a flood. He pulled me out and got me to the hospital. A debt like that deserves to be repaid. As they stepped out of the old mansion, Elena felt for the first time in days that she could breathe freely. Beside her walked her wise mother. Behind her stood a reliable defender, and ahead awaited the restoration of justice. Winter no longer felt like an ending. It had become a time of cleansing, a preparation for a new beginning. Mama, she said, taking Dolores by the arm. Grandma was right. What doesn't kill us really does make us stronger. You're just beginning to understand. Her mother smiled with that wise sadness that only comes with years. Tomorrow, you'll be stronger than today, and the day after that, even more. That's how we go on, my dear. That's how we live. Monday greeted Elena with a court ruling and the keys to her own atelier. The security guard was gone, as if he had never been there. And at the door stood Concepcion, with a bouquet of carnations and a wide smile. Senora Elena, my dear. She rushed to embrace her like a mother welcoming home a daughter after a long absence. I'm so happy, I thought all was lost. Elena stepped through the threshold of her beloved atelier and breathed in the familiar scent, a mixture of starched fabric, machine oil, and the faint perfume of her clients. Everything was in its place. Mannequins posed just as she left them, sewing machines ready for work, shelves of fabric sorted carefully by color and texture. Tell me everything that's been going on, Elena said, as she put on her work apron, the white one with blue flowers that her grandmother had sewn for special occasions. Concepcion launched into the story, occasionally throwing her hands up in disbelief. On Thursday, he came with some guy in an expensive suit, said, I'm the new owner now. All workers are transferring to a new atelier on Avenida Central. Can you imagine? He even offered us 1.5 times the salary. And the girls? Elena asked. The girls? Concepcion smirked. Galina told him straight, Senora Elena took me off the street when my husband started drinking. I'm not going anywhere. And Tamara was downright offended, said, What do you think we are? Traitors? Doña Carmen taught us, Senora Elena feeds us, And you expect us to sell our souls for money? A warm feeling spread through Elena. These women had stayed not out of greed, but out of gratitude and simple human decency. He was furious, Concepcion continued. Yelled that we'd regret it. Said the atelier would close anyway. Then he started calling the clients. Did many cancel? Almost none, the seamstress beamed. Julia told him straight. Don Diego, a wedding dress is sacred. If Senora Elena started it, she'll finish it. I won't trust other hands. The whole day was spent getting the atelier back up and running. Clients called to apologize for the temporary confusion and scheduled new fittings. By evening, the order book was once again filled for the next 2 weeks. Elena worked until nightfall, savoring every stitch, every movement of the scissors across the fabric. Her hands remembered everything, how to hold the chalk for marking, at what angle to cut, how much pressure to apply to the sewing machine pedal. This was her element, her world, where she was both master and creator. On Tuesday, around noon, when sunlight poured through the atelier's large windows, there was a soft knock at the door. Elena looked up from the pattern she was working on and saw a young woman holding a baby in her arms. Valeria was nothing like she had imagined, not a femme fatale, not a calculating seductress. Just an ordinary girl with tired eyes, wearing a simple jacket and jeans, holding an infant who squirmed restlessly in her arms. "Are you Senora Elena?" the woman asked, her voice trembling with nervousness. "Yes, you must be Valeria." "Can I talk to you, privately?" Elena nodded to Concepcion, who quietly excused herself to the back workshop. Valeria stepped into the fitting area and sank wearily into a chair. The baby in her arms was fussy, crying, then calming down, then starting to whimper again. "He hasn't been sleeping well," Valeria explained, rocking the child. "It's been like this for a week. Maybe he's teething, I don't know. I'm losing my mind from the sleepless nights." Elena studied Matteo. Chubby cheeks, dark eyes, a head full of chestnut hair. A sweet child. But something about his features felt oddly familiar, and not because of Diego. "Why did you come here?" Elena asked gently, without aggression. I don't know." Valeria shook her head. "I wanted to see you, to understand what kind of person you are. Diego told me things, but—" "What kind of things?" "That you were cold, that you only cared about work, that the home meant nothing to you, family meant nothing." Valeria spoke softly, her eyes downcast. "And that you couldn't have children, and because of that, you became bitter." Elena felt something tighten inside her. So that was it. He hadn't just left, he'd poisoned her image in the eyes of the new woman. "And you believed him?" "At first, yes." Valeria finally lifted her eyes. But later, Diego turned out not to be the man I thought he was. He imagined that life with a baby would be simple, that I would stay home, cook, do laundry, and he would just come home and play with his son for half an hour before bedtime. And in reality? In reality, the baby cries at night, and he gets angry. He says I'm a bad mother, that Matteo is spoiled, that he needs strict discipline. Valeria hugged the baby closer. And now he wants me to work too. Says we don't have enough money. "Where did you work before?" "In a hardware store, as a sales assistant. That's where we met 2 years ago." Valeria hesitated. "He used to come in a lot, buying materials. Then he started courting me, bringing flowers, inviting me to cafes." Elena did the math in her head. 2 years ago. That was when she and Diego had started to drift apart. He often stayed late at work, talked about complex projects and the need to build relationships with suppliers. "And when did you find out you were pregnant?" "Almost right after we met," Valeria nervously adjusted her hair. I was still seeing Andres back then, my ex. But when he found out about the baby, he disappeared right away. Said he wasn't ready for fatherhood. And you told Diego the baby was his? Not right away. Valeria's voice dropped to almost a whisper. At first, I thought about getting rid of it. But then, Diego was so kind, so caring. And I was afraid of being alone. My mom lives far away, in Venezuela. I don't really have close friends. Andres vanished. What was I supposed to do? Elena stayed silent, trying to process what she had just heard. So Diego had been living for a year under the illusion of fatherhood. Raising another man's child, believing he was his own. And demanding that she vacate the apartment for his son. Does Mateo look like his father? Elena asked carefully. Valeria flinched as if struck. Which father? Diego. Yes, of course. But her voice was trembling. I mean, he's still little, it's hard to say. Children change. Elena studied the baby intently. Dark hair, brown eyes, the shape of his nose. Diego had blonde hair, gray eyes, and a completely different nose. Does he look like Andres? Valeria turned pale. Why are you asking? Just curious. People say children often inherit traits from their fathers. Andres... Valeria hesitated, then blurted out. Andres was restless like that as a baby. His mother told me. He didn't sleep well, cried all the time. The words hung in the air. Valeria realized she had said too much, and quickly covered her mouth with her hand. So he's Andres's child after all, Elena said quietly. I didn't. Valeria, I'm not here to judge anyone. I just want to understand the truth. The young woman began to cry, softly, hopelessly, the kind of crying that comes from exhaustion and despair. Yes, he's Andres's. But Diego wanted a child so much, he was so happy. And I was afraid that if I told him the truth, he'd leave me, and I'd be completely alone. Do you regret it now? I don't know. Valeria wiped her tears. On one hand, yes, I lied to a good man. On the other hand, if I hadn't lied, where would Mateo and I be right now? Elena stood up and walked to the window. Outside, people passed by. Cars drove past. Life carried on as usual. But here, inside the atelier, another illusion was collapsing. Does Diego know? Number and I can't tell him. He loves Mateo so much. Calls him my boy, buys him toys, talks about the future. What about Andres? Andres doesn't even know he has a son. After I told him I was pregnant, he changed his number and moved away. I heard he's in Colombia now. Elena turned around. Valeria sat hunched over, holding the child tightly. Young, frightened, cornered by life. Not a villain, not a calculated homewrecker, just a girl who made mistakes out of fear and loneliness. What are you going to do? I don't know. Valeria shrugged. Diego says I have to go back to work, but who will watch Mateo? We can't afford a nanny, and daycare only takes kids from age 2. And what if Diego finds out the truth? He'll kill me, Valeria whispered, or throw me out, and I'll be left with a child in my arms, no money, no place to go. I have nowhere. Elena sighed. What a tangled story. Diego had destroyed their marriage for an illusion. Valeria was living in a lie out of fear, and little Mateo, the only innocent one, was caught in the middle. Go home, she said wearily. Think things through. Lies always surface sooner or later. It's better to tell the truth yourself than to wait for it to explode on its own. After Valeria left, Elena stood at the window for a long time, reflecting on everything she had just heard. Diego left her for a child that wasn't even his. A cruel irony of fate. or a fitting punishment for betrayal. That evening at home, Elena sifted through old documents stored in a drawer of her mother's sideboard. Forms, test results, medical reports, the full history of their childless marriage, neatly filed in folders. She paused on one document, a report from the fertility clinic dated 8 years ago. Elena remembered that day like it was yesterday. She and Diego had spent 6 months undergoing tests, hoping to find out why they couldn't conceive. She reread the doctor's final statement. Female reproductive factors, within normal limits. Male factor infertility identified. Severe oligoasthenozoospermia. IVF with donor material recommended. Elena closed her eyes, recalling the conversation with the doctor. "Doctor, is it possible not to tell my husband it's his issue? He takes anything related to failure very hard." "You want to take the blame yourself?" the doctor asked, surprised. "I want to protect his sense of manhood. Tell him the problem is with me." And the doctor had done just that. Diego had hugged her then, comforted her, said he loved her no matter what. And Elena had carried that lie within her for 8 years, believing she was sacrificing herself for a greater good. Now, rereading those medical files, Elena saw the truth clearly. Diego physically could not be Mateo's father. The child wasn't his, couldn't be his, which meant their marriage had been destroyed for a phantom. She placed the documents back in the folder. Tomorrow she would show them to Carlos Moreno. He needed to know the full truth. What to do with that truth? Time would decide. Outside, the heat of the day was finally fading. Inside, the house smelled of her mother's empanadas and the quiet promise of tomorrow's plans. And in Elena's chest, a strange feeling began to grow. Not triumph, not revenge, but a deep, bitter compassion for everyone caught in this unraveling drama. Truth has a strange nature. It always rises to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. And when it does, everyone will have to choose again. In 2 days, the first court hearing was scheduled. Elena was preparing for it like an exam, one that would decide her right to remain herself. The courtroom smelled of old furniture and stale justice. Elena sat next to Carlos Moreno, flipping through the folder of documents. Across from them, at the defendant's table, Diego was passionately discussing something with his lawyer, a young, overly confident man in an expensive suit. "All rise. Court is in session," the clerk announced. Judge Castillo, a woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled into a tight bun, took her seat. Elena felt an odd sense of relief. She was glad the case would be heard by a woman. She'll understand. "We are hearing the case of Ramirez versus Ramirez regarding division of property," the judge announced. "The floor is given to the representative of the defendant." Diego's lawyer stood, squared his shoulders, and began a speech that sounded well rehearsed. "Your Honor, my client actively contributed to the development of the family business throughout their 12-year marriage. It was thanks to his contacts in the construction industry that the atelier received orders for custom workwear. He brought in clients, advised on modernization, and invested his own funds in purchasing equipment." Elena clenched her fists. What nerve! Diego had never shown real interest in her work. Once or twice he'd brought in wives of colleagues who ordered dresses for office events. And that was it. "In light of this," the lawyer continued, "the defendant demands compensation amounting to 50% of the business's value, which, according to an independent appraisal, totals 500,000 pesos. Counsel for the plaintiff, your objections?" The judge turned to Carlos Moreno. Carlos stood slowly, with the calm confidence of someone who knows the truth and is unafraid to speak it. "Your Honor, all of the defendant's claims are unsupported by documentation." He opened the thick folder. Here are the atelier's income statements for the past 5 years. Here are bank records confirming that all major equipment purchases were made using business profits. Here are client contracts, none of which mention the defendant as an intermediary or guarantor. The judge reviewed the documents carefully. Diego's lawyer tugged nervously at his tie. As for client acquisition, Carlos continued, we are prepared to present testimonies from long-standing customers who will confirm that they came to the atelier through word-of-mouth recommendations, not through the defendant. The court orders a financial audit of the atelier's records for the past 3 years, Judge Castillo declared. The hearing is postponed for 2 weeks. As they were leaving the courthouse, Diego called out to Elena. Wait, we need to talk. Carlos made a move to stay, but Elena gestured for him to leave. It's all right. Wait in the car. Why are you doing this? Diego looked tired, even worn down. We can settle this like decent people. Like decent people? Elena gave a bitter smile. Was that when you threw me out of the house? Or when you barred me from entering my own atelier? I was angry. Emotions got the better of me. But now, he rubbed his face with both hands. Elena, I don't want to fight you in court. Let's part peacefully. Then give up your claim to compensation. I can't. I need the money. For my family, for Mateo's future. Your family, Elena echoed. Weren't we a family? Diego looked away. We were, but things have changed. Yes, Elena said quietly. Now I know you're willing to destroy 12 years for the sake of an illusion. What illusion? I have a son. Elena wanted to tell him the truth about the medical documents, Valeria's confession, the fact that Mateo wasn't his child. But something held her back. It wasn't the time. It wasn't the place. Maybe it was just pity for a man who had already lost too much. See you in court, she said, and walked away toward the car. The days that followed were a test of endurance. Diego launched a full-blown campaign to discredit Elena among their mutual acquaintances. He told people she was greedy and selfish, that she'd been wasting the family's money on her whims for years, and now refused to share even a fraction. Some believed him. Patricia, whom Elena had been friends with since school, suddenly began avoiding her. When Elena asked what was going on, the answer was vague. You see, dear, I just don't want to get involved in your personal issues. It's between the two of you. But we're friends. Doesn't it matter to hear both sides? Of course it matters, but Diego said some things. Anyway, I think you should just make peace and not air your dirty laundry in public. What hurt even more was hearing it from Doña Clara, the neighbor they had greeted on the landing for years. Señora Elena, is it true you threw your husband out of the house? People say he's wandering around with the baby, living in rented rooms. It's not true, Elena replied wearily. He left on his own. Oh, sure. Men don't leave just like that. Must have been for a reason. That evening, Elena arrived at the atelier and walked into what looked like a full-blown women's council. Concepcion, Galina, Tamara, and 2 seamstresses from a neighboring atelier were sitting in the fitting area with coffee cups in hand. What's going on? Elena asked, surprised. We're having a meeting, Concepcion announced seriously. Galina informed us that Don Diego is going around town telling stories about you. We've decided to take action. What kind of action? This kind, said Galina, the elder seamstress with a commanding presence. Tomorrow we're visiting our clients, the ones who've known you for years. We'll tell them the truth. They deserve to know who's who. Ladies, please don't, Elena protested. This is my issue. No, it's not, Tamara interjected indignantly. We work here. It concerns us too. If your reputation suffers, the atelier could shut down. Then where will we go? And just as people, added one of the visiting seamstresses, It's simply wrong. We see what kind of person you are. Fair. Kind. You've never hurt anyone without reason. Remember when Concepcion had to go to the hospital? Galena jumped in. You paid her full salary for 3 months. You could have just paid half. And when Tamara's husband lost his job, you gave her a 6-month advance, said another woman. Elena listened as something began to thaw inside her. These women remembered every little thing, every act of kindness. To them, she wasn't a betrayed wife. She was someone worth standing up for. Thank you, she said quietly. But let's not make a scene. Just do your work well, like always. The truth will defend itself. On Saturday evening, her mother hosted a true women's council at home. A few neighbors came. Doña Rosa from the apartment across the hall, and Señora Marta from the 3rd floor. Both had gone through similar trials. Both had survived. Listen, dear, said Doña Rosa, a lively older woman with bright eyes. When my Pedro ran off with his secretary back in '85, I thought it was the end of the world. 3 sons to raise, no profession, no money. You know what I did? What could I do? She shrugged. I cried, of course. But then I pulled myself together. I enrolled in early childhood education courses. A year later, I was working at a kindergarten. 5 years after that, I was the director. I raised my 3 boys, helped raise the grandkids too. And Pedro? She waved her hand dismissively. He suffered with that secretary for 3 years before she left him. Tried to come back, but it was too late. My story's similar, added Señora Marta, joining in. Only mine left in '93 and during the economic crisis. Said I was holding him back, that a schoolteacher wife didn't fit into his big business plans. And how did you manage? I started a flower stand. First I sold from my balcony, then I rented a stall at the market. Now I've got 2 stores and a greenhouse outside the city, she said with a satisfied smile. And your ex? Went bankrupt 5 years later. Now he drives a cab. Dolores was pouring coffee into cups. See, my dear, she said gently. We've all been through it, and we survived, and came out stronger. What advice would you give me? Elena asked. The #1 rule, said Doña Rosa seriously. Don't beg and don't humiliate yourself. Dignity. That's all we have when everything else collapses. But don't seek revenge either, added Señora Marta. Revenge is poison, and it poisons you first. Live your life. Build your own happiness. That's the best revenge. And work, Dolores concluded. Work heals better than any medicine. When your hands are busy, your head can't dwell on pain. Elena nodded, soaking in the wisdom of these women. Each of them had carried their own cross. Each had found the strength to rise and move forward. And if they could do it, so could she. By the end of the week, it became clear that Diego's smear campaign had failed. In fact, it had backfired. Regular clients of the atelier began bringing their friends and acquaintances. Concepcion could barely keep up with recording the orders. Señora Lucia from House 9 asked if you could make her a suit for her anniversary, Concepcion reported to Elena. And Doña Caterina wants to order a wedding dress for her daughter. She says she's heard you have golden hands. A pleasant surprise came in the form of a call from the American partners. Mr. Johnson himself phoned Elena. Señora Ramirez, we've decided to postpone our deal for 6 months. Not cancel, postpone. We understand you're going through a difficult time right now, but we believe in your professionalism and are willing to wait. Thank you for understanding, Elena replied, her eyes welling up with tears of gratitude. We only work with reliable partners, and reliability isn't just about financial performance, it's about character, and you have it. That evening, while reflecting on the week, Elena realized she was managing without her husband, without his connections, without his support. She was standing on her own, relying on her strength and the help of loyal people. The atelier was running, Clients were returning, orders were coming in. Most importantly, she felt needed, valuable, capable of creating beauty with her own hands. Maybe this was what true independence meant. Being able to rely on yourself and knowing you can handle whatever comes your way. Having a craft that feeds you, and people who respect and support you. Grandma Carmen had been right. A woman should always have her own piece of bread. And now Elena understood. She had hers. But more and more often, one question haunted her at night. Does Diego have the right to plan his future, not knowing the truth about his past? By Saturday, the question had become unbearable. The day began in a fog, thick and milky, wrapping the city like a curtain trying to soften the harsh edges of reality. Elena sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and the medical report in her hand. For 8 years, that piece of paper had sat in a folder like a ticking time bomb. And now, the time had come to shatter the last illusion. "Mom, I want to show Diego these documents," she said, not lifting her eyes from the page. Dolores stopped washing the dishes and turned around. "Are you sure?" "I don't know, but keeping up this lie, he's building a future, dreaming about a family with someone else's child, and in court he's demanding compensation for being a father. That's not right." Her mother dried her hands on a towel and sat down beside her. "You know what your grandmother used to say?" Dolores placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "A lie for salvation stops being salvation when it starts to kill. You protected his pride for 8 years, and he destroyed your life for an illusion." "But I'm scared, Mama. What if he thinks I'm doing this for revenge?" "And aren't you?" Dolores asked frankly. Elena paused. What was driving her? The desire for justice or the thirst for vengeance? The line between the two is sometimes thin as a razor's edge. Maybe a little revenge," she admitted honestly. "But more than that, I want the truth to come out. He should know what he lost and what he sacrificed everything for." "Then tell him, but be ready. He might not believe you, or worse, believe you and hate you even more for it." Elena dialed Diego's number. Long rings, then that familiar voice. "Hello." "Diego, we need to meet. We need to talk. Properly." "What's there to talk about? Everything will be settled in court." "Not everything can be settled in court. Some things are just between us." A pause. In the background, she could hear a baby crying, the rustle of plastic bags, a woman's voice. "Fine, but make it quick. I have a family now." "Let's meet at the park, on our bench. Do you remember?" Another pause. That bench, by the pond where they met 20 years ago. He'd been reading Borges. She was studying for a literature exam. A simple love story between an engineering student and a future teacher. "I remember. Tomorrow at 2. The Sunday park greeted her with silence and fallen leaves. October undressed the trees slowly, like an old woman taking off her jewelry before sleep. Elena arrived early, sat on their bench, and tried to picture herself at 20, naive, in love, believing in forever. Diego arrived exactly at 2. He looked tired, irritable. His face showed the impatience of someone who felt they had more important things to do. "Well," he said, not even sitting. "What did you want to talk about?" "Sit down, please." Elena patted the bench. "This won't be quick." "I don't have time for your sentimentality, Elena. Valeria's waiting. Mateo's cranky. Say what you need to say." "Fine." She pulled a white envelope from her bag. "Take this." "What is it?" "Medical records from 8 years ago." Diego reluctantly took the envelope, but didn't open it. "Why are you giving me this?" "Open it. Read it." "Elena, I don't get the point of these games." "Just read it," she said firmly. "Then we'll talk." He opened the envelope with the annoyance of a man being forced into something he considered pointless. He took out the report, scanned it briefly. His face began to change, from irritation to confusion to shock. "What is this supposed to mean?" he whispered. "Exactly what it says. Male factor infertility. Severe. You can't have children, Diego. You never could." Diego reread the document, slowly, syllable by syllable. "But the doctor said it was your issue." "I asked the doctor to say that," Elena said calmly. "I wanted to protect your masculinity." "This is fake!" Diego shouted, leaping up from the bench. "You forged it to get back at me." "Reproductive Health Clinic on Avenida San Martin, Dr. Ramon Lopez. You can verify it yourself." Elena remained composed. "Or better yet, retake the tests. The result will be the same." Diego stood there, gripping the document, slowly absorbing the weight of what it revealed. Mateo wasn't his son. Couldn't be his son. All those months of happy fatherhood, a lie. "So, Valeria," he began, then stopped. "It looks like it," Elena sighed. "But I don't think she's evil. Just a scared girl afraid of being alone." "But how? How could she lie for a whole year? Look me in the eye every day? Let me believe I was a father?" "And how could you lie to me for a year?" Elena asked quietly. "Sneaking around, building a new life, while telling me you still loved me?" Diego sank onto the bench, crushed by the weight of realization. The paper slipped from his hand and drifted away in the wind. Elena didn't go after it. "Why did you stay silent for 8 years?" he asked hoarsely. "Because I loved you. Because I thought I was protecting you," Elena said, watching the last ducks drift across the pond. "Do you remember how you reacted to any hint that the problem might be yours? How sensitive you were to jokes from friends about real men and fatherhood?" "I remember," he whispered. "I thought, let him believe it's my fault. Let him live without shame. I believed love was enough." "And now you're doing this to get revenge?" "Maybe." Elena looked him in the eye for the first time. "But not only that. You're demanding compensation in court, claiming it's for the sake of your child. But Diego, you don't have a child, not one of your own." Diego covered his face with his hands. His shoulders trembled, from the cold or from tears. "What have I done?" he whispered. "What have I done? I believed in a beautiful story, wanted to be a father so badly I stopped seeing the truth." "And Valeria? Did she know?" "I think so. Women usually know who the father is." They sat in silence, each lost in thought. Leaves rustled around them, birds called overhead as they flew south. Life went on, indifferent to human drama. "Elena," Diego said at last, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For everything, for leaving you, for believing someone else's lies more than our truth, for destroying what we built together." "It's too late," she replied softly. "Some things can't be put back together." "I know. I just needed to say it." Elena stood up from the bench. "Go home, Diego. Talk to Valeria, find out the full truth, then decide what you want to do. And if she denies it, then take the paternity test yourself. Compare it with that report." She walked toward the park exit without looking back. Behind her sat the man she had spent the best years of her life with. Now he seemed like a stranger, lost, crushed by the truth. Diego had been sitting in El Barrio bar for 3 hours. Rum became vodka. Vodka turned into beer. The bartender glanced over with concern, but didn't intervene. Memories swirled in his head. Valeria dodging conversations about the pregnancy. Getting anxious when he asked about the due date. How Matteo didn't look like him, not in eye color, nose shape, or even personality. And Elena's words echoed in his mind. I wanted to protect your masculinity. 8 years she stayed silent. Let him believe it was her fault. Took on blame that wasn't hers. Endured his frustration, his impatience, his pressure to get treated. What a fool I've been, he muttered into his glass. A complete fool. I lost the one woman who truly loved me. For what? For the illusion of fatherhood. For a girl who used me as a convenient stand-in dad. At 10 that night, he came home. Valeria was putting Matteo to bed, softly humming a lullaby. A picture of domestic bliss. One that, just that morning, had felt real. Now it looked like a staged set. Where have you been? Valeria asked, without looking up from the crib. You promised to be back for dinner. I met with Elena. Why? Valeria's voice carried a hint of alarm. To talk. To clarify something. Diego sat down across from her. The alcohol had dulled his pain, but sharpened his clarity. Valeria, whose child is Matteo? What? She turned to him, and he saw it in her eyes before she spoke. Fear. Whose child is Matteo? Tell me the truth. Yours, of course. What are you talking about? Don't lie. His voice was quiet but cold, steely. I know I can't have children. Medical fact. So, whose son is Matteo? Valeria went pale, backed up against the wall. I don't understand. Andres? Diego asked bluntly. And he saw the answer in her eyes before her lips formed the word. Yes, she whispered. Andres. Silence. Somewhere beyond the wall, music played. A car passed outside. In the crib, a baby, not his son, breathed softly. Why? Diego asked, drained. Because I was scared, Valeria sobbed. Andres ran when he found out. Said he wasn't ready to be a father. But you were so kind, so caring. When you started courting me, I thought... Thought you could fool the idiot? No, not like that. I thought, maybe I'd fall in love. That we'd become a real family. That Matteo would grow up calling you Dad. And the truth? Were you ever going to tell me? Valeria said nothing. Her silence was the answer. Diego stood and walked to the window. Below, the city lights flickered. Life went on, people unaware of the personal disaster unfolding above them. Tomorrow the sun would rise, and he would be someone else. No longer a father, no longer a husband, just a betrayed man in midlife. Pack your things, he said, not turning around. What? Start packing. You're leaving tomorrow. Where to? With a child? No money? To your mother, in Venezuela, or to Andres. That's your choice. Diego, please, forgive me. I'll give you money for the trip and to get settled. But you can't stay here anymore. Valeria began to cry louder, but she didn't beg. She understood. The game was over. The mask was off. And Matteo? You love him. I loved an illusion. Diego turned to her. Matteo is a sweet child, but he's not my son, and I'm not his father. Let him grow up with his real one. The night passed in tears and packing. Valeria moved through the apartment, folding clothes between quiet sobs. Diego sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee, thinking about how fast something seemingly solid could collapse. In the morning, he walked them to the bus station, handed her money, bought the tickets. Matteo slept peacefully in her arms, unaware his life was about to change again. "I'm sorry," Valeria said quietly before boarding. "I've already forgiven you," Diego replied. "Just don't lie anymore. Not to anyone, especially not to yourself." The bus pulled away. Her face flashed in the window, young, afraid, full of regret. Then the bus vanished into the morning fog, and Diego was alone. Alone with the knowledge that he had lost the only woman who had truly loved him. For a mirage of family happiness that had never existed. Tuesday was gray, like the worn asphalt under Elena's feet as she walked toward the courthouse. Autumn had taken full control, stripping the trees and promising a long winter. But inside her there was calm, the deep calm of someone who knows the truth and is ready to defend it. Carlos Moreno met her at the entrance with a reassuring smile. "Ready for the final round?" "Ready." Elena nodded, adjusting the tailored suit, the one she had sewn 3 years earlier for important meetings. The courtroom was filled with its usual solemnity. At the defendant's table sat Diego, gaunt, hollow-eyed, looking more like the accused than the claimant. Beside him, his lawyer nervously shuffled papers, clearly sensing the case was already lost. "All rise. Court is now in session," announced the clerk. Judge Castillo took her seat, scanning the courtroom with a sharp, deliberate gaze. In the first row sat Elena's supporters, Concepcion, Doña Rosa, Señora Marta. They had come to stand by her, and their presence gave her strength. "We are hearing the case of Cervantes Diego versus Cervantes Elena," the judge began. "Representative of the plaintiff, your final statement?" Diego's lawyer rose, but before he could open his mouth, his client spoke quietly. "I withdraw all claims." "Excuse me?" the judge asked, confused. Diego stood slowly, with effort, like an old man. "I withdraw my request for compensation regarding the atelier. I agree to a 50-50 split of the apartment. I have no further claims." His lawyer jumped up. "Don Diego, we didn't discuss—" "Sit down," Diego said wearily. "It's over." The judge exchanged a look with the clerk. "In that case, the court rules as follows. The individual enterprise, Rosa Atelier, remains the sole property of the defendant. The apartment at the listed address is to be divided equally between the parties. Court fees ... "I'll cover them," Diego interrupted. When the judge retired to issue the final ruling, a heavy silence settled in the courtroom. Suddenly, Diego stood and turned to the gallery. "I want to apologize to everyone here." His voice trembled. "Elena, I'm sorry for trying to take away the work of your life. Ladies," he addressed the atelier workers, "I'm sorry for almost costing you your jobs. I was wrong, in everything." Concepcion blinked away a tear. Doña Rosa pursed her lips and looked away. Elena watched her former husband and felt no triumph, only a deep, hollow sadness. After the verdict, Diego caught up to Elena outside the courthouse. "Can we talk? One last time." Carlos Moreno made a move to stay, but Elena nodded. "Wait for me in the car." They walked to a small park beside the court building. Diego lit a cigarette, a habit he'd given up early in their marriage, but had apparently returned to during these hard weeks. "Thank you for not taking revenge," he said, exhaling into the cold air. "Revenge? For what?" Elena asked, surprised. "For ruining our life, for believing someone else's lies over your truth, for being so weak." Elena looked at him closely. Diego had aged in just a few weeks. Deep lines around his eyes, gray at his temples, his posture hunched. He finally understood the scope of his mistakes. "You weren't weak," she said quietly. "You were selfish. You thought only about your needs, your fears, your dreams, and forgot about me. I know, I get it now. He inhaled again. You kept silent about my medical issues for 8 years. You protected my pride. And I blamed you for the infertility. I accused you. I pushed you to get treatment. I even hinted that you weren't a real woman. He shook his head. I'm sorry. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve it. I just want you to understand. I've finally realized my mistakes. Elena pulled gloves from her bag. The air was getting colder. Everyone has the right to make a mistake, Diego. But not to repeat it. After a pause, she asked, What happened with Valeria? She left for Venezuela, to her mother. He smiled bitterly. You saw me put her on the bus. Yes, I did. Gave her money too, didn't you? Yeah, for the trip and to get started. He exhaled, then added, You know what's strange? I'm not even really angry at her. Why not? Because I realized she's just another victim of circumstance. Young, scared. She was afraid of raising a child alone. And there I was, a ready-made dad with a flat and a job. Is she in contact with the real father? Yes. Andres agreed to meet his son. Might even recognize him officially. Diego stubbed his cigarette on the edge of the bench. Or maybe he won't. That's not my problem anymore. Elena sat in silence, reflecting on what she'd heard. Diego really had changed. Gone was the arrogant confidence that had irritated her in the final years of their marriage. In its place, the beginnings of self-awareness. What will you do now? She asked. I'm leaving for Colombia. Got a job offer there. He looked at her. Starting over at 40. A bit late, but what can you do? And the apartment? I'll sell you my half below market value. Call it compensation for the pain I caused. Elena started to protest, but he stopped her with a gesture. Don't argue. I don't need the money. The job comes with housing. You'll make good use of it. Expand the atelier, or something worthwhile. By the end of the week, it was clear that Elena's reputation hadn't just been restored. It had grown stronger. Her story of surviving divorce with dignity and defending her life's work spread across the city. Not as gossip, but as an example of courage and integrity. Patricia, her childhood friend, who had been avoiding her just a week ago, called with apologies. Darling, forgive me. I was such a fool. Diego sounded so convincing, and I believed him without asking questions. Can I come over? I want to order a suit. Of course, come by, Elena replied without resentment. A crisis shows who people really are. Now I know who I can count on. Doña Clara, the neighbor who had reproached Elena the week before for being cruel to her husband, now greeted her with extra warmth and often asked about how the atelier was doing. See? Dolores said over evening coffee. The truth always comes out, and people value decency. Mom, do you regret that I didn't forgive Diego? Maybe I should have given him a second chance? Forgiveness and going back, those are two different things, my dear, her mother said, pouring coffee into rose-painted cups. You can forgive someone and still not let them hurt you again. Wisdom is knowing the difference. On Saturday morning, Diego came to collect his things. Elena had asked Concepcion to stay with her. She didn't want to be alone with her ex-husband. He packed his suitcases silently, methodically. Books, clothes, personal documents. He left the family photos on the dresser, apparently realizing they belonged to her now. That's everything, he said, zipping up the last suitcase. I'll have the paperwork for the apartment share prepared through the lawyer next week. Thank you. It's not gratitude, it's justice. Diego put on his jacket. Elena, I won't ask you to be friends. I know I don't deserve that. I just want to say, I hope you'll be happy. And you too. Find your own path, Diego. Everyone should have their own path. He nodded and walked to the door. At the threshold, he turned back. If you ever need anything, legal questions, documents, call me. Not all bridges have to be burned. All right. The door closed. Concepcion peeked out from the kitchen. Is it over? It's over, Elena nodded. And she truly felt that it was. One life had ended. The life of a married woman who sought happiness in marriage and motherhood. A new life had begun. The life of an independent woman who knows her worth and how to fight for justice. That evening, Elena walked through the now emptier apartment. In Diego's former study, only built-in shelves and the desk remained. She imagined turning it into a workshop for special orders, or a library of fashion albums, or simply a guest room. Outside, the city lights were flickering on. A new week was beginning, a new stage of life. And for the first time in years, Elena looked forward to tomorrow. Not because she wanted to escape today, but because she was ready to build a future. Her own, real future. 3 months had passed since the court proceedings ended. Winter gave way to spring, and Elena's life transformed so profoundly that she sometimes barely recognized herself. Her gaze was now calmer, more confident. Winter had melted like an old sorrow. March brought the first patches of thawed earth and the scent of life returning, and along with them, news that 3 months ago would have seemed unbelievable. The Rosas atelier hadn't just survived the divorce. It flourished, like a tree that had long grown in shade but suddenly burst into the sunlight. "Elena, the Americans are here!" Concepcion reported excitedly, peeking into her office. "They're unloading the truck." Elena rose from the desk where she had been reviewing financial reports. The numbers were promising. Turnover was up 40%, profit up 50%. The deal with the American suppliers had finally gone through. Now the atelier was receiving brand new sewing equipment, the very machines she had dreamed of a year ago. In the courtyard, a truck stood, while workers carefully unloaded machines packed in wooden crates. Mr. Johnson, the same trim American businessman, watched the process with professional precision. "Señora Cervantes," he greeted her, removing his cap. "Congratulations. You're about to have the best atelier in the region." "Thank you for your patience," Elena replied, shaking his hand. "I know you had to wait." "Good things are worth waiting for," Mr. Johnson smiled. "Hardships make people stronger. We understand that." By the end of the week, the new equipment had been installed and tested. Elena opened a second workshop in the neighboring unit, which she had managed to rent on favorable terms. She hired 2 more seamstresses, Doña Carmen, a divorced mother of 2, and young Patricia, a recent graduate from a textile vocational school. Standing in the new space, where the American machines hummed steadily, Elena felt a strange dizziness, the kind that comes from witnessing your own success. A year ago, she was a wife who dreamed of children and depended on her husband's decisions. Now she was the head of a growing business, one that supported 8 families and brought joy to hundreds of clients. "Lucia, please pass the bread," said Dolores. The 15-year-old girl with serious eyes and neat braids obediently passed the basket. Carlos Moreno watched his daughter with pride and tenderness. She was growing up polite and bright, despite the fact that her mother had died when she was only 10. Sunday lunches at Dolores's home had become a tradition. At first, Carlos came for legal matters, to help with contracts, advise on taxes, explain new laws. Then he started staying for coffee. Then Dolores began inviting him and his daughter to the table. "Elena," said Lucia, carefully spreading butter on her bread. "Can I help you with sketches?" I'm good at drawing." "Of course," Elena smiled. "After lunch, I'll show you the new collection. Your opinion would mean a lot." Carlos met Elena's eyes and smiled gratefully. Lucia had trouble connecting with peers, too serious, too grown up for her age. But around Elena, she opened up, became just a teenager. "Papa says you're a very strong woman," the girl went on. "That you built a successful business after difficult times." "Your father exaggerates," Elena blushed. "I just did what I know how to do." "I'm not exaggerating," Carlos said seriously. "Character can't be faked. You either have it or you don't." Dolores nodded approvingly as she poured coffee. She liked this man. Calm, dependable, without empty ambition or flashy words. Most importantly, he looked at Elena not as a prize, but as an equal. The atelier had become more than just a workplace. It was now a kind of informal women's support hub. Doña Carmen, the new hire, came in the first few weeks visibly tense, as if expecting something bad to happen. Her husband had left her 2 years ago, and she'd been jumping between odd jobs ever since, barely making ends meet. "I still can't believe this is how work can be," she confessed to Elena during a lunch break. "No yelling, no humiliation. My last boss made every day feel like a survival test." "Why would anyone need to yell?" Elena asked, surprised. "Yelling doesn't make people work better." "Exactly. I don't get it either. But many people believe you can't have order without being harsh." Over time, a small informal circle formed around the atelier. Clients who were going through divorce or family crises lingered after fittings, sharing their problems. Elena listened, gave advice, or simply hugged a woman who needed comfort. "You know," said Doña Caterina one day, as she ordered a suit for a job interview, "you've become a symbol for me." "A symbol of what?" "Proof that a woman can be independent and happy, that you don't have to cling to a man at any cost." Elena realized her story had become a source of inspiration to others. Unexpected and a little intimidating, but it came with a certain responsibility. She had to live up to the image of a strong woman, even when doubts occasionally crept in. "Mom, tell me more about Great-Grandma Carmen," Elena asked, helping set the table. Dolores smiled. In recent months, her daughter had often asked about their ancestors, as if seeking the roots from which she could draw strength. "Carmen Estella?" Her mother opened the cabinet and pulled out old photographs. "She was an incredible woman, widowed in the 1930s, left with 4 children. Hunger, ruin, and yet she managed to feed everyone. How? She sewed, at home through the night. During the day she worked at a factory, and in the evening she took private orders. Your grandmother said they used to fall asleep to the sound of her sewing machine, and wake up, and she'd still be sewing." Elena studied the yellowed photograph. A stern woman in a dark dress, with strong hands and a determined face. In her eyes, an unbreakable will to survive and raise her children. "And this is your great-grandmother on your mother's side," Dolores continued, showing another photo. "Soledad. She was a seamstress too. They said no one in the area could sew a wedding dress better than she could." "So tailoring runs in our blood?" "Seems like it," her mother smiled. "And every one of them was independent. Each her own boss. Maybe that's why you managed to get through everything." That evening, Elena spent hours looking through the family albums. The faces of women who had lived before her, who had fought, survived, raised children. In every generation, there was one who took responsibility for the family, who became the pillar for others. Now that role belonged to her. Carlos Moreno proposed on a quiet May evening when the jasmine outside Dolores's house bloomed so heavily its branches brushed the second-floor windows. There was no kneeling or grand speech. He simply said during dinner, "Elena, I'd like us to get married." Lucia jumped up in her chair. "Yay! That means Elena will be my mom?" "If she agrees," her father smiled. Elena set down her fork and looked at this steady, intelligent man who had spent a year and a half patiently earning her trust. Not a heartthrob, not a rich man, not a ladies' man, just a good person who understood her worth and didn't want to change a thing about her. "I agree," she said simply. "But on one condition, the atelier remains mine. And so does my independence." "I never intended otherwise," Carlos replied. "I fell in love with you exactly as you are." The wedding was modest, with only close friends and family. Concepcion cried tears of joy. Dolores beamed. Lucia ran around in a new dress Elena had made just for her. Carlos Moreno looked both proud and a little overwhelmed, perhaps not quite believing his happiness. "Now you're officially my daughter," Elena whispered to Lucia during their dance. "And you're my mom," the girl replied, hugging her tightly. 2 years had passed since the day Elena returned to her mother's home with a broken heart and 2 suitcases. Now, standing in the same living room, she could barely recognize the woman she once was. "Abuela, should I make this neckline deeper?" Lucia asked, bending over a dress sketch. "I think yes," Dolores agreed. "It'll look lovely on a young figure." Elena looked at the scene and felt a deep satisfaction. Not euphoria, not elation, just the calm contentment of a life that had come together in the right way. The atelier was thriving, her family was at peace, and Lucia was growing into a kind, intelligent girl. Most importantly, Elena had remained true to herself. "Mom," she asked Dolores, "do you remember how you used to say that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger?" "Of course I do." "Now I understand what that really means. It's not about surviving the blow. It's about realizing you can rely on yourself, no matter what." Carlos Moreno set down his newspaper. "I think happiness is when you don't have to win someone over or change yourself. When someone loves you exactly as you are." Outside, spring thunder rolled, promising warm rain and new hopes. Orders were waiting at the atelier. A family waited at home. And in her heart, a quiet confidence in the days ahead. Elena stepped to the window and looked out at the street, where the trees glistened green in the rain. Somewhere out there, Diego was living a new life. Somewhere, Valeria was raising her son. Everyone had found their path. Everyone had learned their lesson. And she stood in a home full of love and understanding, surrounded by people who valued her for who she truly was. And she knew, real happiness isn't about conquering someone or proving anything. Happiness is staying true to yourself and being loved exactly for that. The truth really does win in the end. Not loudly or triumphantly, but quietly and naturally, like spring rain that nourishes the roots and helps new life grow. Friends, what do you think about Elena's decision? Did she do the right thing by telling Diego the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and share it with your friends. We wish you health and peace of mind.